The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the tall windows of Marcelli's, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where the silverware weighed more than most people's wallets. The sound created a rhythm that Maya Torres had memorized over her 6 years working there. A percussion that matched the click of her practical shoes against marble floors, the soft clink of crystal glasses being set on white tablecloths, the murmur of conversations about things she'd never afford. She was 28, though some days she felt twice that. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn since her first shift, and her uniform, black slacks, white button-down, burgundy vest with the Marcelli's crest, fit her like a second skin. She knew every table number by heart, every preference of the regular customers, every temperamental quirk of the espresso machine in the back. Tonight was a Tuesday, which meant the dinner rush would be moderate, wealthy but not extravagant, the kind of crowd that ordered without looking at prices and left tips that could pay her electric bill. Maya had learned not to expect more than that. Not kindness, rarely acknowledgement, never gratitude that felt genuine. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. She was refilling water glasses at table 7 when she first saw him. The man who would change everything was seated alone at table 12, the corner booth with the best view of the rain-soaked street outside. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair swept back from a face that belonged in a painting, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of secrets, and hands that moved with the kind of precision that came from a lifetime of consequence. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and on his left pinky finger sat a ring that caught the light like captured starfire. It was a diamond ring, but not the kind you'd see in a jewelry store window. This was the kind of ring that had a name, a history, a value that couldn't be calculated in mere dollars. The diamond was deep blue, the size of a marble, set in what looked like platinum with smaller stones orbiting it like planets around a sun. Maya tried not to stare, but her eyes kept returning to it as she moved through her section. The man ordered in a quiet voice that somehow commanded respect. Ossobuco, a specific vintage of Barolo that she had to check with the sommelier, and a side of roasted vegetables prepared without oil. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't fidget. He simply sat there, occasionally turning the ring on his finger, lost in thoughts that seemed to weigh him down like stones in his pockets. "That's Alexander Donovan," whispered Rosa, the other waitress working the dining room that night. She was 45, a mother of 3, and had been at Marcelli's longer than anyone could remember. Her hands were perpetually red from washing dishes in her second job, but her smile never faded. "The real estate developer owns half the buildings downtown. They say he's worth 300 million. Why's he eating alone?" Maya asked, balancing a tray of appetizers for table 9. Rosa shrugged. "Rich people are alone even when they're surrounded. That's what my grandmother used to say. Money builds walls, Mija." The evening progressed in its familiar rhythm. Maya served, cleared, smiled, and moved. Her feet ached, they always did, but she'd learned to ignore it. Table 3 needed more bread. Table 15 wanted their steaks more rare than the kitchen had prepared them. Table 8's elderly woman had dietary restrictions that required Maya to make 3 trips to the kitchen to verify ingredients. It was during one of these trips, carrying a tray loaded with dessert plates, that she saw it happen. Alexander Donovan stood to leave. He pulled out his wallet, leather, understated, the kind that whispered wealth rather than shouted it, and placed several bills on the table. As he did, his hand brushed against the water glass. The ring, perhaps loose from the rain's humidity or from the weight he'd lost that made all his clothes hang slightly wrong, slipped from his finger. It fell in complete silence, or at least that's how Maya would remember it later. In reality, the restaurant was full of sound. Conversations, the kitchen's clatter, someone's laughter from the bar. But in her memory, the ring fell through space like a meteor, tumbling in slow motion until it hit the marble floor with a sound like a bell. It bounced once, twice, then rolled under the table, disappearing into the shadows beneath the white tablecloth that hung to the floor. Alexander Donovan didn't notice. He was already walking toward the entrance, his attention on his phone, his posture straight despite whatever invisible burden he carried. The host was bringing his coat, black cashmere that probably cost more than Maya's car. Maya stood frozen, her tray balanced on one hand, her heart suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't name. She should have called out, should have stopped him before he reached the door. But something held her back. Maybe the training that said never interrupt a customer's exit. Maybe the way the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Maybe just the paralysis of witnessing something significant before understanding why it mattered. By the time she set down her tray and moved toward table 12, Alexander Donovan was gone. The door swung shut behind him, and through the rain-streaked windows, Maya could see him climbing into a black car that pulled away from the curb like a shark sliding into dark water. She dropped to her knees beside the table. The ring was there, half hidden in the shadow cast by the table leg, its blue diamond still catching light that seemed to come from nowhere. Maya reached for it carefully, as if it might burn her. The metal was warm from his finger, and when she lifted it, the weight surprised her. It was heavier than she'd expected, solid and real in a way that made her hands tremble. "Did you find something?" The manager, Gerald Heston, appeared above her. He was a thin man with glasses that constantly slid down his nose and a manner that suggested he'd been disappointed by life and planned to return the favor. His eyes fixed on the ring in Maya's palm, and his expression shifted through surprise, calculation, and something that looked uncomfortably like greed. "I'll take that," he said, reaching for it. "We'll put it in the safe until the owner returns." But Maya's fingers closed around the ring. Some instinct, the same one that had kept her alive through poverty, through her mother's illness, through years of barely scraping by, made her pull back. "I should return it personally," she heard herself say. "I was his server. I know who he is. It's more personal that way." Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might pull rank, might demand the ring with the authority of his position. But Rosa appeared beside them, her presence solid and supporting. "Maya's right," Rosa said. "The customer knows her face. It'll seem more professional. Better for the restaurant's reputation." Gerald hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Fine, but you return it tomorrow, directly to his office. And Maya," his voice dropped to a warning, "that ring is probably worth more than you'll make in your lifetime. Don't even think about." "I won't," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll return it first thing tomorrow." She slipped the ring into her vest pocket, feeling its weight against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The rest of the shift blurred past. Maya moved through her tables mechanically, her mind elsewhere, her hand occasionally touching her pocket to confirm the ring was still there. She couldn't stop thinking about Alexander Donovan's face, the sadness that had hung around him like fog, the way he'd turned the ring on his finger, as if trying to remove something more than just jewelry. At midnight, when Marcelli's finally closed and the last customers filed out into the rain, Maya stood in the employee changing room with Rosa. "You're going to return it, right?" Rosa asked, pulling on her jacket, a worn denim thing with a broken zipper that she'd safety pinned shut. "Of course," Maya said. But even as she spoke, she pulled out the ring and held it to the light. The blue diamond seemed to glow from within, and for the first time, Maya noticed something she'd missed before. Inside the band, there was an engraving. The letters were tiny, worn smooth by years of wear, but she could just make them out in the fluorescent light. For E. Until the stars forget to shine. A.D. E. Who was E? And why did the inscription carry such weight, such permanence, such desperate promise? "Maya." Rosa's voice was gentle. "What is it?" "There's an inscription," Maya whispered. "This isn't just expensive. This is personal. This meant something to someone." Rosa moved closer, squinting at the tiny letters. When she read them, her expression softened into something like grief. "My husband gave me a ring with an inscription once," she said quietly. "Before the cancer took him. These words, they're not just words. They're anchors. They're the things you hold on to when everything else is drowning." Maya closed her fingers around the ring again. "Then I have to return it. Tomorrow." But that night, Lying in her tiny studio apartment with its water-stained ceiling and single window that looked out at a brick wall, Maya couldn't sleep. She kept the ring on her nightstand, and every time she looked at it, questions multiplied like stars. Who was he? Where were they now? Why had Alexander Donovan been eating alone, turning this ring on his finger like a prayer or a punishment? And why? This was the question that kept her awake until dawn light crept through her window. Why did she feel like returning the ring would open a door she couldn't close again? The rain continued outside, washing the city clean or drowning it, depending on how you chose to look at it. Maya had always been someone who saw rain as washing. She needed to believe things could be made clean again. She needed to believe that returning something lost could matter, that small acts of integrity accumulated into something larger, that the world noticed when you tried to do right. But as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, the ring's blue stone seemed to pulse in the darkness like a warning or a promise she didn't yet understand. By morning, everything would change. The simple act of returning a lost ring would pull back a curtain on secrets, lies, love, and loss so profound that Maya would question everything she thought she knew about truth, about family, about the invisible walls that separated lives like hers from lives like his. The ring was not just a ring. It was a key. And Maya Torres, waitress at Marcelli's, survivor of hardship, believer in small kindnesses, was about to unlock something that neither she nor Alexander Donovan were ready to face. Maya woke to the sound of her neighbor's baby crying through the thin walls. It was 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm was set to go off. But she knew from experience that falling back asleep was impossible. The apartment building, a 4-story walk-up on the edge of the warehouse district, came alive early, and its residents rarely considered the concept of quiet. She lay still for a moment, staring at the crack in the ceiling that looked like a river delta or a tree branch, depending on her mood. Today it looked like reaching fingers. The ring sat on her nightstand, exactly where she'd left it. In the gray morning light filtering through her inadequate curtains, the blue diamond looked darker, less magical, more like a burden that had been transferred from one person to another without either of them choosing it. Maya reached for her phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen she'd been meaning to replace, and searched for Alexander Donovan real estate. The results populated instantly. Hundreds of articles, photographs, mentions. She scrolled through them, building a picture of the man she'd served ossobuco and expensive wine. Alexander Donovan had built his empire from nothing, or so the narratives claimed. The son of a construction worker and a seamstress, he'd started with a single apartment renovation in his 20s and had grown his business through what articles called vision and ruthless determination. His company, Donovan Properties, owned commercial buildings, luxury apartments, and the kind of real estate that transformed neighborhoods, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, depending on who you asked. There were photographs of him at charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and city council meetings. In all of them, he wore the same expression Maya had seen last night. Controlled, distant, as if he were performing a role he'd mastered but no longer believed in. Maya kept scrolling until she found what she was looking for. His office address. Donovan Properties was headquartered in the Ashford Building downtown, occupying the top 3 floors of a glass tower that reflected the sky like a mirror. She had no appointments today. Marcelli's was closed on Wednesdays for maintenance, though everyone knew Gerald just wanted a day off. That meant she could go to the office this morning and return the ring before noon. Simple, clean, done. But as Maya showered in her bathroom with its perpetually dripping faucet and water pressure that varied from trickle to assault, she kept thinking about the inscription. For E. Until the stars forget to shine. She'd had a boyfriend once, when she was 22. Daniel. He'd worked at the automotive shop down the street from her mother's apartment, and he'd had a smile that made promises he never kept. Maya had believed in those promises for almost a year before she'd discovered he was making similar promises to at least 2 other women. When she'd confronted him, he'd shrugged and said, "What did you expect? I never said we were exclusive." As if words mattered more than actions, as if the absence of a promise meant the presence of betrayal was acceptable. She'd learned something important that day. People showed you who they were through what they chose to protect. Daniel had protected his freedom. Alexander Donovan had protected a ring with an inscription that spoke of permanence. Maya dressed in the closest thing she owned to professional attire. Black jeans without holes, a gray sweater that had been her mother's, and the same practical shoes she wore to work. She looked in the mirror, a cheap thing from IKEA that she'd assembled herself, and saw what she always saw, a woman who was neither beautiful nor plain, neither remarkable nor forgettable. Someone who could blend into any background, who could serve food and clear plates without being truly seen. Sometimes she wondered if that was a blessing or a curse. She made coffee in her apartment's tiny kitchen. Instant, because real coffee was a luxury she couldn't justify, and ate toast with the strawberry jam Rosa had given her last week, homemade from her garden. Rosa had a house, small but hers, with a yard where things grew. Maya had tried to keep a plant once, a succulent someone had said was impossible to kill. She'd killed it in 3 months. At 8:30, she put the ring in a small jewelry box she'd kept from her mother's things and placed it carefully in her bag. The bag was canvas, worn at the handles, covered in buttons and patches she'd collected over the years. A rainbow flag, a quote from Octavia Butler, a pin that said, "Nevertheless," she persisted. The bus ride downtown took 45 minutes. Maya sat by the window and watched the city transform as they traveled from her neighborhood to the business district. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Buildings grew taller, streets grew cleaner, people's clothes grew more expensive. By the time the bus reached the Ashford building, Maya felt like she'd crossed into a different country. The building's lobby was all marble and chrome, with a ceiling that soared 3 stories high. A fountain in the center featured abstract sculptures that might have been birds or flames or simply expensive shapes. Maya's shoes squeaked slightly on the polished floor as she approached the security desk. The guard was a black man in his 50s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Marcus. "Good morning," Maya said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "I'm here to see Alexander Donovan. I have something of his that I need to return." Marcus's expression shifted to polite skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but..." Maya pulled out the jewelry box. "I work at Marcelli's restaurant. Mr. Donovan left this behind last night. It's important." She opened the box just enough for Marcus to see the ring. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "One moment," he said, and picked up a phone. Maya waited, hyper-aware of her reflection in the polished surfaces around her. She didn't belong here. Everything in the lobby seemed designed to remind people like her of that fact. The art that probably cost more than her annual salary, the leather furniture that was meant for looking at rather than using, the ambient scent of expensive cologne and ambition. A woman appeared from the elevators. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair cut in a severe bob and a navy suit that seemed to have been painted onto her slim frame. Her heels clicked with the kind of authority that came from never having to ask permission. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, Mr. Donovan's assistant," she said, extending a hand. Her handshake was brief and cool. "You have something belonging to Mr. Donovan?" Maya showed her the ring. Jennifer's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. Shock? Recognition? Fear? It was gone before Maya could name it, but it had been there. "Come with me," Jennifer said. Immediately, they rode the elevator in silence. Jennifer's finger hovered over the button for the 32nd floor, but then moved up to the 33rd. The penthouse level. When the doors opened, Maya stepped into a space that seemed to exist in a different dimension from the building below. The offices of Donovan Properties occupied an open floor plan with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the entire city. Maya could see the harbor, the bridge, the neighborhoods spreading out like a map. And there, in the corner office separated by glass walls, was Alexander Donovan. He was standing with his back to them, looking out at the city. Even from here, Maya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man bracing against wind that no one else could feel. "Wait here," Jennifer said, and walked toward his office with quick, decisive steps. Maya watched as Jennifer knocked and entered. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw the moment when Jennifer showed him the ring. Alexander Donovan turned, and his face, that controlled, distant face, crumbled into something Maya hadn't expected. Relief. Devastating, overwhelming relief. He took the ring from Jennifer with hands that shook, and for a moment, he simply held it, his eyes closed, his lips moving as if in prayer or conversation with someone who wasn't there. Then he looked up, and his gaze found Maya through the glass walls. Their eyes met, and Maya felt the impact of it like a physical thing. There was a question in his expression, or maybe a plea. Help me. Or maybe, who are you to witness this? Jennifer gestured for Maya to enter. She walked across the office floor, past desks where people worked with focused intensity, past conference rooms with their doors closed on important meetings, past all the machinery of wealth and power, until she stood in Alexander Donovan's office. Up close, he looked older than he had in the restaurant. There were lines around his eyes that suggested grief or sleeplessness or both. His suit was perfect, but he wore it like armor that no longer fit properly. "You found my ring," he said. His voice was rough, as if he'd been talking for hours or not talking at all. "At the restaurant." "Yes, sir," Maya said. "It rolled under your table after you left. I wanted to make sure it got back to you." Alexander looked down at the ring in his palm. "Do you know what this is worth?" Maya shook her head. "A lot, I imagine. But that's not why I returned it." "No?" He looked at her with sudden intensity. "Then why?" Maya hesitated. She could say something simple, because it was the right thing to do, because it's her job, because honesty matters. All of those things were true. But standing there in his office, looking at a man who held a ring like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world, she found herself telling a different truth. "I saw the inscription," she said quietly. "It seemed like the kind of thing that would matter to someone, that it would hurt to lose." Alexander's face did something complicated, a progression of emotions too quick to name. Then he did something Maya didn't expect. He sat down heavily in his chair, as if his legs had stopped supporting him. "Elizabeth," he said, "my wife. This was her ring. Is her ring. I gave it to her on our 10th anniversary 23 years ago. She died 6 months ago. Cancer." The word hung in the air like smoke. Maya thought of Rose's husband, of her mother's final months in the hospital, of all the ways that disease could hollow out a life while leaving the shell standing. "I'm sorry," Maya said, because there was nothing else to say. "I wear it," Alexander continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "I've worn it every day since she died. I know it's strange. It's her ring. But I can't." His voice broke. "I can't let her go yet. And losing it last night, I didn't realize it was gone until I got home. I've been awake all night, trying to figure out where, thinking maybe I'd never see it again." He looked up at Maya, and in his eyes was a nakedness that made her want to look away but couldn't. "You could have kept it," he said. "Sold it. I wouldn't have known it was you." "I would have known," Maya said simply. Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to his desk, and pulled out a checkbook. "How much?" he asked. "Name a figure. Whatever you think is appropriate as a reward." Maya felt something twist in her chest. "I don't want money." "Everyone wants money," Alexander said. But there was no judgment in his voice, just weariness. "There's nothing wrong with accepting compensation for honesty. If I take money, then it wasn't honesty," Maya said. "It was just a transaction. And that ring," she gestured to it, still in his hand, "that ring deserves better than to be a transaction." For the first time since she'd entered his office, Alexander smiled. It was small, sad, but genuine. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya Torres." "Maya Torres," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Do you know what Elizabeth would have done if someone returned something precious to her?" Maya shook her head. "She would have made them tea," Alexander said. "She believed that kindness deserved conversation, that good deeds required acknowledgement. She would have sat with you and learned your story. You don't have to." "I'm not doing it because I have to," Alexander interrupted gently. "I'm doing it because she would have wanted me to, and because I've spent 6 months living like I died with her. Maybe it's time to remember how to be alive." He gestured to the sitting area in his office, 2 leather chairs and a sofa positioned near the window. Would you sit with me? Just for a few minutes? I'd like to hear about the person who gave this back to me. Maya hesitated. She should leave. She'd returned the ring. Her job was done. But something in Alexander's face, the loneliness there, the desperate hope that one human connection might make the weight of grief slightly more bearable, made her nod. Okay, she said. For a few minutes. They sat, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out below them like a kingdom made of glass and stone, and the dreams of 8 million people trying to build lives from whatever materials they could find. Alexander placed the ring on the table between them, and in the morning sunlight streaming through the window, the blue diamond caught fire. It looked like captured sky, like the color of hope, like something that could survive death itself if only someone remembered to hold on to it. Tell me about yourself, Alexander said. Not your job, yourself. Elizabeth always said you could know someone's whole soul from the things they chose to notice. Maya thought about refusing, thought about keeping herself protected behind the walls she'd built over years of learning that vulnerability was dangerous, that letting people see you meant giving them weapons to hurt you. But then she thought about the inscription in the ring. Until the stars forget to shine. Someone had once loved Alexander Donovan enough to promise him forever. Someone had seen him fully and chosen to stay. So Maya began to talk. She told him about growing up in the neighborhoods where his buildings stood, about her mother who'd cleaned houses and sang in the church choir, about her dreams of being a teacher that had been derailed by medical bills and necessity. She told him about Rosa, about the regular customers at Marcelli's who never bothered to learn her name, about the small moments of beauty she collected like shields against despair. The way light hit rain, the sound of genuine laughter, the perfect golden crust on bread fresh from the oven. Alexander listened with complete attention. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his phone, didn't allow his gaze to wander to the work piled on his desk. He listened as if her story mattered, as if her existence was something worth acknowledging. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Elizabeth would have liked you. She believed that the people who notice beauty in hard places are the ones who create it. What was she like? Maya asked. If you want to talk about her. Alexander's expression transformed. For the next 20 minutes, he painted a picture of a woman Maya would never meet but felt she knew. Elizabeth Donovan, who'd taught high school English and believed that poetry could save lives, who'd made terrible puns and collected vintage typewriters and insisted on dancing in the kitchen while making dinner, who'd faced her diagnosis with anger first, then acceptance, then a determination to fill her remaining time with as much living as possible. She made me promise, Alexander said, his voice thick, that I wouldn't let her death make me cruel, that I wouldn't use grief as an excuse to stop seeing people. But I don't know how to do that. Every day feels like walking through a building with all the lights off, trying to remember where the furniture is. Maya understood. She'd felt that way after her mother died. Like the world had been rearranged while she wasn't looking, and nothing was where it was supposed to be anymore. Maybe you start small, she said. Maybe you just try to notice one true thing every day. Something real. Something that matters. Alexander looked at her with an expression that suggested she'd said something significant, though Maya wasn't sure what. Would you have lunch with me? He asked suddenly. Not here. Somewhere normal. Somewhere Elizabeth would have liked. I want to... He paused, searching for words. I want to hear what someone from the world sees when they look at it. I've been so far removed. I think I've forgotten. Maya knew she should say no. Knew that having lunch with a millionaire was crossing some invisible line between server and served, between her world and his. But she heard herself saying yes anyway. Maybe because she was lonely too. Maybe because Rosa was right about rich people building walls, and maybe those walls hurt the builders as much as they excluded everyone else. Maybe because Alexander Donovan had loved someone enough to carry their ring like a talisman, and Maya wanted to believe that kind of love could teach someone to see. They made plans to meet the next day at a cafe Elizabeth had loved, in a neighborhood that sat exactly between his world and Maya's, neutral ground where neither of them would be entirely comfortable. As Maya left Donovan Properties, riding the elevator down through the building's gleaming floors, She caught sight of herself in the mirrored walls. She looked the same. Same clothes, same face, same worn bag with its collection of pins and patches. But something inside her had shifted. The door she'd worried about opening? It was already open. And beyond it was a path she couldn't see the end of, that might lead anywhere, that terrified and compelled her in equal measure. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rosa. "Did you return it? Everything okay?" Maya typed back, "Returned it. Everything's complicated." Because that was the truth. The simple act of returning a ring had become something else. An invitation, a connection, maybe a friendship with a man whose grief matched her loneliness in frequencies she recognized. She thought about the inscription again as she walked back toward the bus stop. "Until the stars forget to shine." It was a beautiful promise, but also an impossible one. Stars did forget to shine. They burned out eventually. Everything did. But maybe the point wasn't permanence. Maybe the point was just choosing to shine as long as you could, to hold on to someone else's light when they couldn't hold it themselves, to believe that small acts of kindness accumulated into something that mattered even if you couldn't see the whole shape of it yet. Maya boarded the bus, found a seat by the window, and watched the city scroll past. Somewhere behind her, in a glass tower that touched the clouds, a man was slipping a ring back onto his finger and maybe, just maybe, allowing himself to hope that being alive was still possible. And somewhere ahead, in a future neither of them could predict, that ring would reveal secrets neither of them expected, would unlock doors to truths that had been buried with love and pain and all the complicated ways that people protected themselves from having to choose between what they wanted and what they believed was right. But for now, on this bus moving through morning traffic, Maya simply felt the weight of the jewelry box leaving her bag, the burden of someone else's precious things returning to their rightful owner, the strange lightness that came from doing one true thing in a world that often seemed designed to reward the opposite. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The cafe Elizabeth had loved was called The Daily Grind, which would have been unbearably cliché if not for the fact that it had been operating in the same location for 47 years and had earned the right to its terrible pun. It occupied a corner spot in the Riverside neighborhood, wedged between a used bookstore and a dry cleaner, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in local art that changed monthly. Maya arrived 15 minutes early, a habit formed from years of service work where being late meant losing shifts. She ordered a regular coffee, not the fancy drink she might have gotten if someone else were paying, and chose a table by the window where she could watch people pass on the street. The neighborhood was mixed in the way cities were before developers decided that mixing was inefficient. There were businesses that had been there for decades alongside new boutiques with minimalist names like Thread or Vessel. Old men played dominoes outside the corner store. Young mothers pushed expensive strollers while talking on phones that cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Teenagers cut through on their way to the high school 3 blocks over, their backpacks heavy with books and all the complicated social algebra of being 16. Maya watched them and thought about what Alexander had said about Elizabeth teaching English. She wondered what it would have been like to have a teacher who believed poetry could save lives. Maya's high school English teacher had been a tired woman named Mrs. Brennan, who'd clearly stopped believing in anything except reaching retirement. Alexander arrived exactly on time, emerging from a car service that pulled to the curb and deposited him on the sidewalk as if he were cargo. He looked different than he had in his office, still wearing expensive clothes, but somehow diminished by them like a costume that didn't quite fit. He scanned the cafe's interior, and when his eyes found Maya, something in his face relaxed. "You came," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I'm a stranger who invited you to lunch after you returned something I lost. When I said it out loud to Jennifer this morning, she pointed out that it sounds like the beginning of a true crime podcast." He smiled slightly. "The Millionaire and the Waitress. One of them won't leave alive." Maya found herself smiling back. "I told my roommate where I'd be and to call the police if I didn't check in by 3. So if this is a true crime podcast, at least there will be evidence." "Smart." Alexander glanced around the cafe, and his expression shifted into something Maya couldn't quite read. Nostalgia mixed with pain. Elizabeth loved this place. She'd come here to grade papers every Sunday afternoon. She said the coffee was terrible but honest, which was more than you could say about most things. A young waitress appeared, college age, with purple hair and a nose ring. Wearing a t-shirt that said, "Nevertheless," she persisted. Maya felt an absurd kinship with her. "What can I get you?" the waitress asked. Alexander ordered the same thing Maya had, regular coffee, and a sandwich from the menu. When the waitress left, he noticed Maya watching him. "What?" he asked. "You ordered the cheapest thing on the menu," Maya said. "But at Marcelli's, you ordered $100 bottle of wine without blinking." "Context matters," Alexander said. "At Marcelli's, I was eating alone in a restaurant where my assistant made the reservation and I was playing the part I'm supposed to play. Here, I'm just—" He trailed off. "I don't know what I am here." "You're Alexander," Maya said. "That's enough." He looked at her with surprise, as if this were a revelation. Maybe it was. Maybe when you spent your life being Alexander Donovan, real estate developer, millionaire, figure of public record, you forgot how to just be Alexander. They talked while they waited for food. Alexander asked about her life, and Maya found herself sharing things she normally kept protected. The way her mother had died slowly in a hospital room, while Maya worked double shifts to pay bills that kept accumulating faster than she could cover them. The guilt of relief when death finally came. Not because she'd wanted her mother gone, but because watching suffering had become unbearable. The way grief felt like wearing clothes that were too heavy, that you couldn't take off no matter how much you wanted to. "I understand that," Alexander said quietly. With Elizabeth, toward the end, I would catch myself thinking, "Please let this be over," and then hating myself for thinking it. Because how dare I want it to end when she was the one suffering. But watching someone you love dissolve inch by inch, he shook his head. "There's no good way through it." "No," Maya agreed. "Just through." Their food arrived. The sandwich was good in the way that simple things were good: fresh bread, quality ingredients, made by someone who cared about the craft even if the setting was humble. Alexander ate slowly, and Maya noticed he was wearing the ring again. It caught the afternoon light streaming through the cafe window, throwing small blue shadows on the table. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. "You don't have to answer. Ask. Why are you having lunch with me?" "Really? You thanked me, you got your ring back. You don't owe me anything." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in small circles on the table. "Do you know what the worst part of grief is?" Maya shook her head. "It's not the big moments," he said. "It's not the funeral or the first holidays without them or cleaning out their closet. It's the small moments. It's ordering coffee and realizing no one knows anymore that you take it black with 1 sugar. It's having a thought you want to share and reaching for your phone before remembering there's no one to text. It's being seen only as what you do. Developer, millionaire, businessman, and never as who you are." He looked directly at her. "Yesterday you saw me. Not my money, not my position. You saw someone who'd lost something precious and you returned it because you understood what it meant. That's the first time in 6 months that anyone has treated me like a person instead of a function." Maya understood. She thought about all the customers at Marcelli's who looked through her, who saw Waitress but never Maya. How many times had she wished someone would ask about her day, her thoughts, her dreams? How many times had she felt like a ghost in her own life? "I see you," she said simply. Alexander's eyes glistened. He blinked quickly, looked away, composed himself with visible effort. "Thank you." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. They finished their lunch talking about easier things. Books they'd loved, places in the city they found beautiful, the small rituals that made life bearable. Alexander told her about Elizabeth's typewriter collection, how she'd restored each one and used them to write letters to friends instead of emails, believing that effort equaled care. "I still have them," he said. "All 23 typewriters, sitting in what used to be her office. I can't bring myself to move them, but I can't look at them either. They're just there, taking up space, reminding me of everything I've lost." "Maybe they're not reminding you of what you lost," Maya said. "Maybe they're reminding you of what you had. Maybe that's worth remembering." Alexander studied her. You're wise, Maya Torres. I'm not wise. I'm just someone who's learned that loss doesn't erase love. It just changes where you keep it. As they talked, Maya became aware of other people in the cafe watching them. An older couple 2 tables over kept glancing in their direction, their faces curious. The purple-haired waitress was conferring with someone behind the counter, both of them looking toward Alexander. I think people recognize you, Maya said quietly. Alexander followed her gaze and sighed. Probably. It happens. Part of the curse of having your face in the business section and on those power brokers lists that magazines love to publish. Does it bother you? It didn't used to. Elizabeth handled it better. She'd smile and say hello and then create this bubble around us where it was just the 2 of us. I never learned that skill. He stood abruptly. Come with me. I want to show you something. Maya hesitated, but something in his face, urgency mixed with hope, made her follow. They left money on the table and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. Alexander's car was waiting, but he waved the driver away. We'll walk, he said. They moved through the riverside neighborhood on foot, and Maya saw Alexander transform as they walked. His shoulders relaxed. His pace slowed. He looked at things, really looked, in a way that suggested he hadn't done so in a long time. He pointed out a mural on the side of a building, asked Maya if she knew the artist. She didn't, but they stopped to examine it anyway. A portrait of a woman made entirely of flowers, her face serene, her eyes closed. Elizabeth would have loved this, Alexander said. She believed beauty should be free, that it shouldn't be locked away in galleries where only certain people could access it. They walked past the high school, where students were streaming out at the end of the day, past the corner store where the old men were still playing dominoes, past a community garden where someone had painted the fence with handprints in every color imaginable. This is where Elizabeth grew up, Alexander said. 3 blocks from here. Her parents ran a bakery. It closed 10 years ago, but the building's still there. He pointed down a side street. She used to say that neighborhoods like this one were the real city, not downtown with its glass towers, but here where people actually lived. Why are you showing me this? Maya asked. Because I need to remember it exists, Alexander said. I've spent the last 6 months in my office or my apartment, both of them 30 floors above the ground. I've forgotten what it feels like to be part of something instead of floating above it. They turned a corner, and suddenly Maya understood where they were going. Ahead of them was a construction site, a large one taking up an entire city block. There was a fence covered in corporate signage. Donovan Properties Presence. The Riverside Luxury Residences. Sophisticated living in the heart of the city. Alexander stopped at the fence, his hands gripping the chain link. This is mine, he said. My project. We broke ground 6 months ago. It'll be 40 stories when it's done. 300 luxury apartments. A gym, a rooftop pool, concierge service. Starting price, $3,000 a month for a studio. Maya looked at the site, then at the neighborhood around them. At the modest homes, the small businesses, the community garden. What was here before? Affordable housing, Alexander said quietly. A 6-story apartment building from the 1950s. Rent-controlled units. The building was old. Needed repairs the owners couldn't afford. I bought it, gave everyone 60 days to relocate, and tore it down. Where did they go? The people who lived there? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him something. I paid their relocation expenses, but I don't know where they ended up. That wasn't part of my concern. My concern was the development, the profit, the transformation of the neighborhood. He turned to face her, and his expression was raw. Elizabeth died 3 days before the demolition. She'd been fighting me about this project for 2 years. She said I was destroying the neighborhood she loved, displacing the people who made it special. We had terrible fights about it. The last conversation we had before she went into hospice was about this building. She said I'd become someone who saw property instead of people. She said I'd forgotten how to see. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know who I am, Alexander said. Not just the man who lost his wife's ring. Not just someone having lunch in a cafe. You need to know that I'm the reason some grandmother had to move out of the apartment she'd lived in for 30 years. That I'm the reason families were displaced. That I build luxury housing in neighborhoods that need affordable housing because luxury is more profitable. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. After you left my office yesterday, I had Jennifer pull the file on this project. I wanted to see their names, the people we displaced. I wanted to see what I'd done. He handed Maya the envelope. Inside were printouts, lease agreements, names, stories reduced to data points. Maya scanned them. Carmen Rodriguez, 72, lived in Unit 4B for 28 years. Marcus Williams, 45, single father of 2, Unit 2C. The Tran family, Unit 3A, 3 generations under one roof. There were 68 people living in that building, Alexander said. 68 lives disrupted so I could build something that would make me richer. And the worst part? I didn't think about it. Not really. It was just business. Just numbers on a spreadsheet. Maya felt anger rising in her chest. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, steady kind that came from recognizing a pattern she'd seen her whole life. Why are you showing me this now? Because you asked me why I was having lunch with you, Alexander said. Because you deserve to know that the man you're sitting with isn't just someone grieving his wife. He's someone who's realizing that grief has shown him all the ways he's failed to see. And I need someone to see that, to know it, to hold me accountable. I'm not your confessor, Maya said, her voice harder than she'd intended. I know, but you're real. You're someone from the world I've been building over instead of building for. And Elizabeth was right. I did forget how to see. But yesterday, when you returned that ring, you saw me. Really saw me. And maybe if someone like you can see me, I can learn to see again. Maya wanted to walk away. Wanted to tell him that her kindness in returning his ring didn't obligate her to absolve him of his guilt. That she wasn't a tool for his redemption. But she also saw something in his face that stopped her. Genuine horror at what he'd done. Genuine desire to be different. What do you want from me? She asked. Help me understand, Alexander said. Help me see what I've been missing. Show me the city from your perspective. Let me learn how to be someone Elizabeth would have recognized. And then what? You'll stop building luxury apartments? You'll suddenly become a philanthropist? You'll fix everything your money has broken? I don't know, Alexander said honestly. Maybe I'll try. Or maybe I'll fail and go back to being exactly who I was. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have seen. Maya looked at the construction site, then at the neighborhood around it, then at Alexander Donovan, millionaire, developer, widower, person. She thought about what Rosa had said about rich people building walls. She thought about her mother, who'd always believed that people could change if they chose to, if they had someone to change for. One condition, Maya said. If I help you see, you have to do something about what you see. You have to take action. Understanding without action is just tourism. Agreed, Alexander said immediately. And you have to meet the people in that file. You have to look them in the eye and understand what your project cost them. Alexander paled slightly, but nodded. Okay, how do I find them? Give me the file, Maya said. I'll find them. People like that. People like me, we're part of networks you don't see. We know how to find each other. They stood there for a moment, an unlikely pair at a construction fence, and Maya felt the trajectory of her life shifting in ways she couldn't predict. She'd woken up this morning planning to return a ring and go back to her regular life. Now she was agreeing to some kind of strange social experiment with a millionaire who wanted to learn how to be human again. Why did you really invite me to lunch? Maya asked. The real reason. Alexander turned the ring on his finger, that habitual gesture Maya was beginning to recognize as thinking made visible. Because when you returned this ring, you said it deserved better than being a transaction. And I realized I've turned everything in my life into transactions. Property, business deals, even relationships toward the end with Elizabeth. Everything became something to be managed, optimized, profited from. He looked at her directly. You treated my precious thing as precious without expecting anything in return. And I thought, Maybe if I spend time with someone who still knows how to do that, I can remember how. Maybe there's still time to become someone who deserves to wear Elizabeth's ring. Maya felt her anger softening, though she tried to hold on to it. Anger was safer than empathy. Empathy led to involvement, and involvement led to disappointment. But she thought about the inscription in the ring, until the stars forget to shine, and wondered if maybe people deserved the same kind of grace. To be loved not for what they were but for what they might become. "Okay," she said. "I'll help you. But I'm not going to make it easy on you." "I wouldn't want you to," Alexander said. They walked back through the neighborhood together, and people watched them pass. The strange pair, wealthy man and working woman, moving through a world that usually kept them separate. The old men playing dominoes called out greetings. The purple-haired waitress from the cafe waved as they passed. A group of teenagers parted to let them through, their conversation pausing just long enough to clock the oddity of the scene. Maya thought about the people in the file, the 68 lives that had been disrupted for profit. She thought about how she could find them, what she would say when she did. She thought about whether this was wisdom or foolishness, whether she was helping someone change or just helping them feel better about staying the same. At the corner where they needed to part ways, Maya to the bus stop, Alexander to wherever men like him went when they weren't trying to become different, he stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a chance." "I haven't given you anything yet," Maya said. "Just agreed to witness what you do with it." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Alexander? The people in that file, they're not abstract. They're not just victims of market forces. They're Carmen and Marcus and the trans and 65 others. Remember that." "I will," he said, and maybe he meant it. Maya rode the bus home in a daze. The city scrolled past her window, the familiar landmarks, the neighborhoods she knew, the invisible borders between one world and another. She thought about borders and how much energy went into maintaining them, how much easier it would be if people just crossed them sometimes. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Alexander. Jennifer got your number from Marcelli's. I hope that's okay. Thank you for today, for seeing me, for agreeing to help me see. AD." Maya stared at the message. She could delete it, block the number, go back to her life. But her fingers moved of their own accord, typing. "Don't thank me yet. I'm going to show you things that will make you uncomfortable. That's part of the deal." His response came quickly. "Good. Comfort is what got me here. Discomfort might get me somewhere better." Maya pocketed her phone and closed her eyes. The bus hummed beneath her, carrying her home through streets she'd walked her entire life, and she wondered what she'd agreed to. Partnership? Friendship? Some kind of social experiment that would probably blow up in her face? She didn't know. But she knew that a blue diamond ring had started something, had opened a door between two worlds that had been kept separate for good reasons and maybe some bad ones. And now she was stepping through that door, not knowing what waited on the other side. The bus stopped at her corner. Maya got off and walked the 3 blocks to her building, past the bodega where she bought her groceries, past the laundromat where she spent Sunday mornings, past the mural of the Virgin of Guadalupe that someone had painted on the sidewall 30 years ago and that no one had ever covered up. Rosa was sitting on the stoop of Maya's building, waiting. She took one look at Maya's face and said, "Something happened." "Something's happening," Maya corrected. "I'm not sure what yet." "Tell me," Rosa said. "Tell me everything." So Maya did. And as she talked, the sun set over their neighborhood, over the buildings that would never be luxury high-rises, over the lives that were lived in careful balance between hope and survival, over the invisible borders that Maya had just agreed to try to cross. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment that cost more per month than Maya made in a year, Alexander Donovan was slipping off his wife's ring and looking at the inscription by lamplight, wondering if he could become the kind of man who deserved the promise it represented. Neither of them knew what came next. Neither of them understood the secrets the ring still held, the revelations that would emerge when the past caught up with intentions, when love and guilt and all the complicated machinery of change collided. But they'd taken the first step. And sometimes Maya thought that's all anyone could do. Finding Carmen Rodriguez took 3 days and the kind of social network Alexander Donovan had never encountered. The invisible web of working people who knew people who knew people. Maya started with Rosa, who knew a woman named Dolores who cleaned offices in the building where Carmen's daughter worked. Dolores knew the daughter, Teresa, who reluctantly agreed to give Maya her mother's new phone number only after Maya explained, carefully, that Alexander Donovan wanted to apologize. Apologize with money? Teresa had asked, her voice hard over the phone. Because that's the only apology that means anything after what he did. I can't promise anything, Maya had said. Just that he wants to hear her story, to understand. There had been a long pause. Then, my mother doesn't need his understanding. She needs housing she can afford. But I'll ask her. Don't hold your breath. But Carmen had agreed. And now Maya and Alexander stood outside a small apartment complex on the east side of the city, 23 miles from where Carmen had lived for 28 years, and Alexander looked like he might be sick. I don't know what to say to her, he admitted. Then start with I'm sorry, and see where it goes, Maya said. And Alexander? Let her be angry. She's earned it. Carmen Rodriguez answered the door with the kind of face that had seen everything and forgiven nothing. She was small, barely 5 feet, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that evaluated them both in a single glance. She wore a house dress and slippers, and her apartment smelled like cooking and pine sol and the particular scent of a place that was clean but would never quite feel like home. You're the man who took my apartment, she said to Alexander. Not a question. A statement of fact. Yes, ma'am, Alexander said. Don't ma'am me, Carmen interrupted. You want to apologize? Then come in and look at what your apology bought me. The apartment was half the size of her old one. Maya could tell from the way furniture was crowded against walls, from the boxes still unpacked in corners 3 months after move-in. There were photographs on every available surface. Children, grandchildren, celebrations frozen in time. A wedding portrait of a young Carmen and a man with kind eyes. A crucifix above the doorway to the bedroom. My husband and I moved into our old apartment in 1997, Carmen said, not sitting, not offering them seats, just standing in the middle of her cramped living room like a general surveying a battlefield she'd lost. We raised 3 children there. My husband died in that apartment in the bedroom with me holding his hand. I knew every neighbor. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew how the afternoon light came through the kitchen window. She pointed to the window in this new apartment. Here, the light is wrong. The windows face the wrong way. I don't know my neighbors, half of them don't speak English, and I don't speak their languages. My church is 45 minutes away instead of a 10-minute walk. My doctor is on the other side of the city. Everything I knew, everyone I knew, gone. Replaced with this. Alexander stood very still, and Maya could see him trying to maintain composure. Mrs. Rodriguez. No, Carmen said, her voice rising. You don't get to feel bad yet. You don't get to come here and feel guilty and then go back to your nice life feeling like you've done something. You need to understand what you took from me. She walked to a box in the corner and pulled out a photo album. Flipped it open to show pictures of a building, her building. Children playing in the hallway. A birthday party in someone's apartment. A Christmas celebration with all the neighbors. We were a community, Carmen said. We helped each other. When Mrs. Chen's husband died, we brought her food for 2 months straight. When the Johnson's son got sick, we all chipped in for his medicine. When I fell and broke my hip, my neighbors took care of me until I could walk again. That building wasn't just walls and floors. It was people. She slapped the album closed. And you destroyed it. You didn't just take our housing. You took our community. You scattered us like leaves. Do you know where Mrs. Chun ended up? A nursing home in Queens because her daughter couldn't find affordable housing near her work. Do you know where the Johnson family went? 3 hours north, away from everything they knew, because that's where they could find rent they could pay. Alexander's face had gone pale. I paid relocation expenses. You paid us to go away, Carmen said. You paid us to stop being your problem. But you didn't pay for the loss of community. You didn't pay for the trauma of being uprooted. You didn't pay for what it feels like to be 72 years old and have to start over in a place where you don't belong. Maya watched Alexander struggle for words, watched him open his mouth, Close it, try again. This was what she'd wanted him to see, the real cost of his decisions, measured not in dollars but in disrupted lives, in broken communities, in the particular loneliness of being displaced. You're right, Alexander finally said. I can't pay for that. I can't fix it. But I want to try to understand it. Carmen studied him with those sharp eyes. Why? So you can feel better? So you can tell yourself you learned something and then do the same thing to the next building? No, Alexander said. So I can stop doing it. So I can be different. Words, Carmen said dismissively. Everyone says they'll be different. Then money talks and they're the same. Alexander pulled out his phone, and for a moment Maya thought he was going to do exactly what Carmen feared. Throw money at the problem. But instead, he pulled up something on the screen and held it out to her. This is the next building my company was going to develop, he said. 4 blocks from where your building stood. 6 stories, rent-controlled, 140 residents. We were scheduled to start in 3 months. Carmen looked at the image, architectural drawings of another luxury development. I'm canceling it, Alexander said, as of this morning, and I'm looking into purchasing the building to preserve it as affordable housing instead. Carmen's expression didn't change. 1 building. Out of how many? How many other buildings are you developing right now? How many other communities are you destroying? 4, Alexander admitted. 4 other projects in various stages. And I'm reviewing all of them. I'm looking at what can be changed, what can be stopped, what can be redirected. And the building you already destroyed? Carmen asked. Mine? What about that? Alexander didn't have an answer for that. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of things that couldn't be undone. Finally, Carmen sighed. She seemed to deflate slightly, and for the first time, Maya saw not anger but exhaustion. You want to understand? Then understand this. Some things once broken can't be fixed. You can try to do better going forward, but that doesn't erase what you did. I will never forgive you for taking my home. Never. But maybe, she paused. Maybe you can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. She looked at Maya. Is he really trying to change? Or is this just guilt that will pass when the feeling fades? Maya thought about the question carefully. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I'm watching, and I won't let him forget what he's seen. Carmen nodded slowly. Then you keep watching. You hold him to it. Because men like him. She turned her gaze back to Alexander. Men like you have good intentions until those intentions cost you something. Real change costs. Remember that. They left shortly after. Alexander was quiet as they walked back to his car, and Maya let him sit with his discomfort. She'd meant what she said to Carmen. She was watching, and she would hold him accountable. In the car, Alexander finally spoke. How many more? How many more people from that file do I need to meet? All of them, Maya said. Every single one. If you're serious about this. That's 67 more conversations like that. Yes. I don't know if I can. He stopped himself. No, I can. I have to. Over the next 3 weeks, they met more residents from the displaced building. Marcus Williams, the single father, who was now commuting 2 hours each way to keep his kids in their same school. The Tran family, who'd moved in with relatives and were sleeping 6 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. James Park, who'd lost his job because his new apartment was too far from his workplace and public transit didn't run early enough for his shift. Each conversation was harder than the last. Each person had a story of loss, disruption, community severed. And each time Alexander absorbed it, really absorbed it, asking questions, taking notes, trying to understand the full scope of what his business decisions had cost. He did more than listen. He started making changes. The building he'd promised to save was officially preserved, with his company purchasing it and establishing it as permanently affordable housing. He hired a staff member specifically to review displacement impacts for all future projects. He established a fund, substantial, meaningful, for the residents he displaced, offering ongoing support beyond the initial relocation expenses. It's not enough, he said to Maya one evening as they reviewed the list of residents they'd met. They were sitting in a diner near Maya's neighborhood neutral ground that had become their default meeting place. Nothing I do will be enough. No, Maya agreed. But it's something. And something is better than nothing. Alexander looked exhausted. He'd lost weight, she noticed. He wore his expensive suits like they were made for someone else. But there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. Elizabeth would have. He stopped. I keep thinking about what she would say about all this. Whether she'd be proud or just disappointed it took losing her to wake me up. Maybe both, Maya said gently. He smiled, that sad smile she was coming to recognize. Yeah, probably both. His phone rang. Jennifer, his assistant, calling for the 5th time that day. Alexander had been ignoring business calls, focusing instead on what he now called the reckoning. His board was getting restless. Investors were asking questions about why projects were being delayed or canceled. Money was being lost. I need to take this, Alexander said, excusing himself from the table. Maya watched him through the diner window as he paced outside, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing in frustration. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of trying to be two things at once. The businessman his company needed and the person he was trying to become. Rosa slid into the booth across from Maya. She'd been working her second job at the diner for 15 years and always found time to check on Maya when she came in. How's your Millionaire project going? Rosa asked, her tone skeptical. He's trying, Maya said. Really trying. Trying and succeeding are different things, Rosa pointed out. You be careful, Mija. Men like that, they have good intentions until those intentions cost them money. Then the intentions disappear. Carmen said almost the same thing, Maya admitted. And maybe you're both right, but what if you're wrong? What if people can actually change? They can, Rosa said. But change takes time, and it takes choosing the hard thing over and over, not just once. You watch and see. When it costs him something real, that's when you'll know if this is real or just rich person guilt. That test came sooner than either of them expected. 2 days later, Alexander called an emergency meeting. Not at his office, but at the diner. He arrived looking like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't. My board is giving me an ultimatum, he said without preamble. Resume the original development plans or step down as CEO. They've given me 2 weeks to decide. Maya felt her stomach drop. What are you going to do? I don't know, Alexander said honestly. If I step down, I lose control of the company. Someone else will take over, and they'll continue with all the projects I've tried to stop. All the changes I've made, the preserved building, the displacement review process, the support fund, they'll probably reverse all of it. But if you stay and resume the original plans, then I become exactly what I was before. I displace more communities. I build more luxury housing that most people can't afford. I go back to seeing property instead of people. He ran his hands through his hair. I'm damned either way. Maya thought about what Rosa had said. This was the moment. This was where intentions met reality, where the cost became real. What did Elizabeth believe? Maya asked. About compromise? About choosing between impossible options? Alexander's expression crumpled slightly. She believed that when you have to choose between what's right and what's practical, you choose what's right and figure out the practical part later. She believed that systems only change when someone is willing to lose something to change them. Then you already know what you have to do. Do I? He looked at her desperately. Because stepping down means I lose everything I've built. My company, my influence, the ability to make any changes at all. Or, Maya said carefully, it means you lose everything you think matters so you can build something that actually does matter. They sat in silence. Around them, the diner hummed with life. People eating meals, having conversations, living lives that would never include glass towers or board meetings or the kind of decisions Alexander was facing. If I step down, Alexander said slowly, working through it, what do I do? Who am I without my company? You're Alexander, Maya said, echoing what she'd told him weeks ago. That's enough. You start from there. He laughed bitterly. Start from there and do what? I'm 60 years old. My entire identity is wrapped up in being Alexander Donovan, real estate developer. What am I without that? Maybe you find out, Maya suggested. Maybe that's the point of all this. Maybe losing Elizabeth wasn't just about losing her. Maybe it was about losing the person you were when you were with her and having to decide who you want to be now. Alexander looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Jennifer, he said when she answered. Schedule a board meeting for tomorrow morning. I'm going to give them my resignation. Maya heard Jennifer's voice through the phone. Sharp, surprised, urgent. Alexander listened for a moment, then interrupted. I know what it means, he said. I know what I'm giving up, but I also know what I'm keeping. Schedule the meeting. He hung up and looked at Maya. Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? Maybe, Maya said. Or maybe you just made the first decision in 6 months that Elizabeth would have recognized as coming from you instead of from your grief. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her apartment thinking about choices and consequences, about what it meant to watch someone unmake their life in the hopes of building something better. She thought about her mother, who'd chosen to keep working even when she was sick because she believed in the dignity of labor. She thought about Rosa, who worked 2 jobs not because she wanted to but because that's what survival required. Alexander Donovan was choosing to walk away from wealth and power because he'd learned to see the human cost of accumulating them. It should have felt triumphant, like a victory for the 68 people he'd displaced and all the others who might have been next. But Maya just felt scared. Scared that this was the moment where good intentions collided with reality and shattered. Scared that she'd pushed him too hard, that he'd regret this decision and resent her for it. Scared that change was always going to be this costly, this painful, this uncertain. The next morning, Alexander stepped down as CEO of Donovan Properties. The announcement made the business news within hours. Real estate magnate Alexander Donovan resigns amid company restructuring, read one headline. Donovan steps down, cites new priorities after wife's death, read another. Maya read them on her phone during her lunch break at Marcelli's, where life continued exactly as it always had. She served wealthy customers who didn't know her name. She cleared plates and refilled water glasses and collected tips that sometimes felt like condescension made tangible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Done. No going back now. Not sure if I should thank you or curse you. She wrote back. Ask me in a year. If you've built something real, thank me. If you regret it, you can curse me then. His response. Fair enough. Have dinner with me? Not as research, as friends. Maya stared at the message. Friends. When had that happened? When had the millionaire and the waitress become people who might share meals not as social experiment but as connection? She wrote back. Okay, but you're paying. Use your money for something good while you still have it. That evening, they met at a restaurant that existed in the space between their worlds. Not as expensive as Marcelli's, not as humble as the diner. They ordered wine and food and talked about things that had nothing to do with real estate or displacement or the price of change. Alexander told her about his childhood, about growing up in a house where money was always scarce and love was abundant, about his father teaching him that buildings were more than structures. They were promises of shelter, of safety, of home. About how somewhere along the way he'd forgotten that and started seeing buildings as just investments. Maya told him about wanting to be a teacher, about still reading poetry in her spare time, about believing that everyone had stories worth hearing if you just bothered to listen. You would have been a good teacher, Alexander said. Maybe I still can be, Maya said. It's not too late. Not if you can blow up your life at 60 and start over. They laughed, and it felt good, normal, human, untouched by all the heavy things they'd been wading through. As they left the restaurant, Alexander said, I need to tell you something. About the ring. Maya felt her attention sharpen. Okay. There's more to its story, Alexander said. More than just the inscription. Elizabeth didn't want me to tell anyone, but now that she's gone. He paused. I think you should know, because it changes things. It changes everything. Alexander took a breath, his fingers touching the ring. The diamond, it's not just valuable because of its size or quality. It belonged to Elizabeth's grandmother, who fled Europe in 1939. It was sewn into the lining of her coat, the only thing of value she could carry. 3 generations of women in Elizabeth's family wore this ring as a symbol of survival, of choosing life when everything said to give up. Maya felt the weight of this revelation settle over her. Elizabeth made me promise something before she died, Alexander continued. She said if anything happened to the ring, if it was ever lost or stolen, I should let it go. She said objects are just objects, even precious ones. What matters is what we do with the time we have. His voice cracked, but I couldn't let it go. When I lost it that night, I felt like I was losing her all over again. And now, Maya asked softly, now I understand what she meant. The ring isn't her. My love for her isn't in this metal and stone. It's in choosing to see people the way she did. It's in trying to be worthy of what she believed I could be. He looked at Maya. You gave me back more than a ring that day. You gave me back a choice about who I want to become. Maya reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Then don't waste it. They sat together as the city lights flickered on outside, 2 people from different worlds who'd found common ground in the space between loss and hope, between who they'd been and who they might still become. The ring caught the light one more time, its blue diamond holding centuries of stories, of survival, love, loss, and the persistent human belief that tomorrow could be different if someone was brave enough to make it so. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.